Hey guys, and welcome to October's House, the place where we talk all TV, cinema, and horror. So if you've watched any of my other videos, you'll probably have noticed that I talk about Final Destination a lot. It's something that I absolutely love, and I think I've mentioned it in at least 4 videos prior to this one. So I've been waiting very patiently over the last 14 years for the 6th installment, and it's finally here, and I have a lot of thoughts. I think it's worth noting that Final Destination 6 went through what we can assume to be quite a few different iterations before we got to Bloodlines, and there are at least 2 that we know of, the first of which was when a concept trailer surfaced online for something called Final Destination Dark Ages. And if you don't know what a concept trailer is, it's basically something that filmmakers put together using clips and imagery from other movies to pitch their movie as like a proof of concept. I always thought that a Final Destination set in like the past was a really interesting concept, so it was a bit sad that that never materialized. And then a few years ago we got some reports that Final Destination 6 would follow a group of EMTs facing death every day, and honestly I couldn't quite get my head around that one, and I'm not surprised that that one didn't come to fruition. But my point is, over the 14 years since Final Destination 5, it does seem like they were kind of struggling to pin down a direction to take this franchise. And what we finally got with Final Destination 6 is a new angle on the you can't cheat death scenario, where death is stalking bloodlines of families that were never meant to exist after being saved in a disaster in 1969. So let's get into the actual review and talk about whether or not what we ultimately got was worth the wait and actually worked out. This movie follows a family that's being stalked by death after the lead character Stephanie keeps having the same premonition that her grandmother had back in 1969 of a Sky Needle type restaurant collapsing where she saved a bunch of people's lives. If this movie has one thing going for it, it is that they really do offer up a new take on the format of the franchise, and it does really seem like they put a lot of thought and care into this one. I do have 1 or 2 issues with it that we will get into, but I do generally think that this movie is really entertaining from start to finish. It never really lets up, and it definitely doesn't shy away from going all in with the shock value. I think the first 3 have this really dark and eerie, distinctive tone, and then the 4th and 5th entries are a bit lighter and they're a bit more polished. This one kind of lands somewhere in between, and it does kind of morph around as the film goes on. We get some really heavy nods to the core identity of the franchise in the first quarter, but it doesn't quite land because let's say like the first 20 minutes or so are set up like a Hallmark rom-com, and I was really confused by this honestly, and I thought to myself, if they don't break out of this, I'm not going to enjoy this. Basically, anything from the premonitions don't feel grounded, like, at all. And I think I mentioned it in my trailer reaction, where I said, like, the 60s vibe kind of gives this, like, hyper-glossy, retro-futuristic aesthetic. And it really distracted me up until the actual disaster started. Once you leave the premonition, it does kind of leave all of that behind, but it still doesn't quite match the rest of the franchise. I think something that I love about these movies is how eerie and paranoid they feel, and you really do feel death's presence in them, and I don't think I can say the same for this one as much. That being said, this one is quite funny, and it's very tongue-in-cheek for a lot of it, and I think once it gets going, it does really excel at being this like modern popcorn horror movie. It's kind of got this Scream 5 kind of vibe, and you can definitely feel Guy Busick's involvement in this one. It is interesting, if not a bit confusing, because while this is a little bit of a departure from the vibe of the rest of the franchise, it also kind of is really good at being a Final Destination movie. I've mentioned a few times that there is a bit of a format switch, and I kind of want to talk about how the story fits into that a bit. The big difference in this movie is that Steph, the lead character, is having a premonition of something that could have happened in the past in 1969 if her grandmother Iris hadn't had the same premonition and saved a bunch of lives. When Steph goes to Iris, who's locked herself away in a death-proof fort, She tells her that when she saved all of those lives, Death started stalking all the survivors, and because there were so many of them, it took Death so long to get to them that they started having families. So now Death is having to go down those bloodlines that were never meant to exist before moving on to the next survivor. I love this, and I think it's done really well, and I think it's done in a really cohesive way. One of my main concerns for this movie was how they were going to explain why it took Death so long to get to this family in particular, but when you consider how big this disaster is, especially compared to the other movies in the franchise, it makes so much sense, and you're just kind of like, yeah, that works. I think the way that Death follows the bloodline down as well is really cool, it's really fun. It's a little bit different, but it's also very familiar. I also want to say Tony Todd's appearance in this is really nice. I think that they did it really well. There's been so much speculation on Bloodworth's identity over the past 20 years that anything could have gone, really. Like, you know, they could have done anything with his character. But I do think that this one kind of gives closure to his arc, and it does it in a very Final Destination way. I think the way that the movie is wrapped up is pretty standard and on par. I don't think it's anything too mind-blowing, but I think visually the closing scene is incredible. I think as a whole, the story is really gripping and it's really interesting, and I think they did a really good job of keeping it kind of in line with the other entries of the franchise. I want to mention that there are quite a few parallels to Final Destination 2 in this movie, and honestly I'm not quite sure whether they were intentional or not. It doesn't really kind of play into the plot at all, or it doesn't really seem to have any purpose. There were one or two things that I was a little bit disappointed with the story, and I have to be a little bit careful on how I word this because I don't want to go too far into spoilers, but I think that there were things that they could have pushed a lot further. Like, I think that there could have been themes and avenues of the story that they could have gone down further, and I think it might not have been the movie's fault necessarily. I think maybe some people built this movie up to be something that it wasn't, but if you can kind of let that go, the story is perfectly great. I also have to say that the deaths in this movie are really, 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 really good. It's so bloody, it's so violent, and I think that modern VFX and CGI are looking better than ever in this franchise. There's at least 4 deaths in this movie, off the top of my head, that I would rank really high in like an overall franchise death ranking. The premonition deaths for the most part are like a lot of fun, but the subsequent deaths throughout the film are even more so. And I think that's propped up by my love for this cast. This is probably my favourite cast of characters and actors since the third film. I think the third film's cast is absolutely iconic, and while this one isn't quite at that level, I don't think there are any bad performances here. My absolute standout is Richard Harmon's Eric. His character is easily the most funny, he's easily the most interesting, and he has some amazing one-liners that are just delivered so well. I'd love to have a conversation with him because it seems for a lot of this he's channeling Matthew Lillard, and I don't know whether that was intentional or not, but I would love to know. I really like Owen Patrick Joyner's Bobby as well. I think he's very lovable. His tortoise is an icon. And I think his relationship with his brother Eric is really cool to see on screen, and the way they interact is really cool too. But I can't really talk about this cast without talking about the lead, obviously. Caitlin Santahana offers up a really good performance here. However, I do think her character is a little bit flat. I think her character could have just done with a little bit more meat. I think what this cast kind of rests on is the family relationships due to the nature of the film. While her relationship with her brother is quite believable and genuine, her relationship with her dad isn't kind of anything, and her relationship with her mother should be really complicated, and it should be really interesting to see on screen, but they don't really explore it bar a few throwaway lines just peppered throughout the movie. But all in all, I do think that this younger cast have some really good chemistry and work really well. I have no issues believing that they are a family. The family aspect as well also does offer up some new angles on the kind of interactions that each character has, because in the previous films, you know, there's a lot of time spent trying to convince people that death is coming, and, you know, a lot of people are like, oh no, you're crazy. But in this one, because they're a family, I think that it's easier for them to kind of get straight into the, oh, how do we defeat death mode, you know? This one gets a 7.5 out of 10 for me. I think that while it does have its flaws, they're not so egregious that it kind of hinders your enjoyment of the movie. This one is so fun. It's just one of those movies that you just strap yourself in and go along for the ride. It's great. And I think that when we compare it to the rest of the franchise, it really does sit up there with some of the best entries. With an already established franchise, obviously if you love the other films, you're definitely going to enjoy this one. I don't think anybody couldn't at least find something to enjoy in there. But also, if you like Radio Silence's work, I think you would really enjoy this. Like the 2022 revival of Scream, Hard Eyes, Ready or Not, that kind of thing. I think that it kind of leans a little bit towards that vibe. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, give it a like, subscribe to the channel. We've got so much more horror content coming. I've got a Saw 11 timeline coming just to kind of break down exactly what happened with it and why it got cancelled. I've got an Insidious ranking coming, and I'm working on this huge, massive American Horror Story piece. So yeah, definitely subscribe. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.